Joining us now is Professor John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago. Great friend of the show. We're honored to speak to him. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
My pleasure to be here.
So, Professor, we haven't been able to speak with you since the outbreak of the conflict. We have been reading quite a bit and looking at some realist scholars. First, we've seen this piece from Foreign Affairs. Let's put this up here on the screen. Curious for your reaction. He says, how America's war on Iran backfired and Tehran will now set the terms for peace. Your general reaction, not only to the war as where we are stand now, but how, if any way, that this actual conflict could come to a close.
Well, I think that starting this war was a colossal mistake, and it's hard to believe that President Trump did this. Not simply because he had promised that he would not start any more wars and certainly not get us into a forever war, but if you're going to go to war, this is the last war that you want to start. And the reason is that the Iranians hold most of the cards. If you think about where we are today, and you think more importantly about further marching up the escalation ladder, Iran can do enormous damage to the international economy. And there's nothing much we can do to prevent that. So we're in a precarious situation right now. And I would argue we don't have an exit ramp, but as we move forward, things only get worse.
We've been talking a lot this morning on the Israeli and U.S. attacks on the South Pars gas field in Iran, and then Iranian retaliation, both in Saudi and Kuwait and in Qatar. What do you make of the significance of these developments and this escalation?
I think it's hugely significant. And I think the fact that President Trump issued this post where he made it clear how angry he was at the Israelis for doing this is evidence of that. Look, President Trump is doing everything he can to keep oil prices under $100 a barrel. And that is not easy to do. And I would note that he has taken sanctions off Russian oil, and he has allowed Iran to sell its oil. It's very important to understand that Iran is selling its oil on world markets. Iran has been allowed to send oil through the Strait of Hormuz. And the reason that Trump is allowing this is because he wants all the oil he can possibly get in the world oil markets. And he's been quite successful, at least at keeping the price of a barrel down under slightly less than $100. Well, what happened yesterday when the Israelis hit this natural gas field in Iran, and then the Iranians retaliated first against Qatar, and now apparently they're attacking Saudi Arabian sites as well, is that the price of a barrel of oil is going up. I saw it was up around $115 this morning. This is disastrous for the United States and for the world economy. And if things continue to escalate, which is a real possibility, the economic situation will only get worse. Yeah. So what happened yesterday really mattered. And that, again, is why President Trump made it clear to the Israelis, don't ever do this again.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Professor, what do you think the best and worst case scenarios are at this point? Start with the best.
The best case is that we work out some sort of negotiated settlement, but I don't see how you can do that. The fact is that to get Iran to stop the war, you have to make major concessions to the Iranians. And I find it hard to imagine the United States and Israel making the sort of concessions that are necessary to get Iran to stop. So I see the war going on. And the worst case scenario is that you continue to march up the escalation ladder, and the consequences for the international economy are devastating. And, you know, we were just talking about oil, but it's not only oil. 1/3 of the world's fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And it's quite clear that what's happening is that without fertilizer, farmers all around the world, including in the United States, are beginning to have major problems planting and and harvesting food. And what this means for the future is that the price of food is going to go up. So not only is the price of gas going to go up and the price of oil going to go up, but the price of food is going to go up. And this is going to create major league inflation, which is going to slow down growth and result in the deaths of many people all around the world. So the potential for disaster here is just not to be underestimated.
Yeah, well, and to your point about the unlikelihood of a negotiated settlement, not only do you have the Iranians that are like, no, you haven't experienced enough pain yet, so we would demand significant concessions in order to come to the table at this point. They don't seem interested in talking right now at all. You also have the Israelis that want this thing to keep going. I wanted to get your reaction specifically to the assassination of Ali Larijan. There's been a lot of speculation that the Israelis are effectively trying to make sure that any potential off-ramps are taken off the table, that anyone who could have been an interlocutor, could have been a negotiator is assassinated, so they are no longer available, that you have more hardliners who are in place within the Iranian government. I wonder if that's your assessment as well.
It certainly looks like that. I mean, anybody who is moderate inside of the Israeli government is taken out. But I
The
think
Iranian
that-
government.
excuse me, the Iranian government is taken out. But I think it's quite clear that more generally, the Israelis have this theory that if they can decapitate the regime, that's a quick way to victory. And this is a fallacious strategy. It just doesn't work. So the idea that they can, kill Iranian leaders and that's going to bring the war to an end is not a smart idea. And again, I think you're right that what the Israelis are trying to do also is take out the moderates and see them replaced by more hardliners, making it more difficult to get a negotiated settlement. But I would argue, Crystal, that no matter who's in charge in Iran, it's hard to see how you get a deal. And the reason is that we would have to make major league concessions to the Iranians to put an end to this war. And that would involve things like ending sanctions, or taking at least most of the sanctions off the table, maybe paying reparations, and also just working out a deal where Iran is guaranteed that it won't be attacked in another 6 months. You want to remember that there was a war in June where Israel and the United States attacked Iran, and here we are, not even a year later, and we're back at it. The Iranians want this to be the last attack by Israel and the United States. So we'd have to give them some sort of guarantees. I find it hard to imagine the United States and Israel doing that.
Right. Professor, what do you also make now of U.S. alliances? And so I've been talking ad nauseum here on the show about the punishment that we're giving to the Japanese, the South Korean, the Taiwanese economies, about the GCC nations, which are projected to contract 14, 15%. Qatar now, their literal lifeblood is natural gas. Who knows how long it will take to rebuild their own facilities, even if the war were to end today. And we magically, gave them sanctions relief and somehow miraculously convinced them not to pursue a nuclear weapon, which I think they would probably want to do at this point. Let's say all of that happened. If everything ends today, what are the state and strategic logic of actual U.S. alliances, which are far more important to the U.S. than Israel after this war?
Well, we've done significant damages to our allies around the world. There's just no question about that. If you look at what's happening in Japan and in India and in South Korea, this is disastrous. And the same thing is true with regard to Europe. By the way, there have been all sorts of reports that instability is returning to Iraq, that the Iran war is spilling over into Iraq. We could go on and on. The negative consequences of this war are extensive. And the fact is, we're not going to get a negotiated settlement anytime soon. This war is going to go on, and the Iranians, of course, have a vested interest in keeping it going until the United States is willing to make the concessions that they demand.
Let's go ahead and put C4 up on the screen here. Israel has also used this as an opportunity to, it appears, annex additional territory in Lebanon, certainly to attack within Lebanon. Here they are, downing a complete apartment building in central Beirut. They, are just Also warning residents, saying that they want to remove them permanently from portions of South Lebanon. Here's another image of the apartment building being destroyed and demolished in the middle of a major city here. So can you talk to us about some of Israel's larger goals and what they're up to, not only in Lebanon and West Bank, in Gaza, and what the project is?
Well, the Israelis, I think, have two goals in Lebanon. One, which is to permanently defang Hezbollah. And then two, I think they want to control all of the territory in southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. Before this war started, on February 28th, the conventional wisdom in the West was that Hezbollah had been defanged and was no longer a serious threat to Israel. Well, we've been watching Hezbollah lob missiles into northern Israel, lob rockets into northern Israel, and all the evidence is that Hezbollah is very much alive. I would also note to you that the Iranians are coordinating with Hezbollah, according to all the reports I've seen, and the Iranians are lobbing missiles into northern Israel, where Hezbollah is firing away. So in northern Israel, the Israeli citizenry is getting bombed quite regularly, which is disastrous for Israel. Furthermore, with regard to invading southern Lebanon and going up to the Litani River, if you look at the number of Hezbollah forces in that region, you look at the terrain, I think it's extremely unlikely that the Israelis are going to be successful. And again, I've been reading reports that the Israelis are losing lots of Merkava tanks, as you would expect, in their attempts to conquer more territory in southern Lebanon. So from an Israeli point of view, what's happening vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon is not good news. They are not doing well. So they're not doing well against Iran, and they're not doing well against Lebanon.
Then why? Why do they continue to do this? Netanyahu has bragged about becoming a, quote, global superpower. I believe he said that in Hebrew. Is that really just about fulfilling his ambition to destroy any potential regional threat, even at the cost of becoming a global pariah and co-opting the United States of America, which itself may abandon it sometime in the future? Why would they continue to expend this much blood and treasure if it's really not in their interest, or is it?
Well, I'd make 2 points. One is the Israelis are addicted to war. The Israelis believe in a very profound way in big stick diplomacy. They believe that they can pound countries into submission. They don't believe that you need political settlements to solve wars. They think that you can settle wars with the mailed fist. This is a foolish way of thinking, but it is the way they think. And that explains a lot of what's going on. The second thing is that it's quite clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu is in political trouble and legal trouble inside of Israel, and that his best strategy for surviving is a constant state of war. So many Israelis believe that as long as Prime Minister Netanyahu is in office, he's going to go to great lengths to keep the war machine in action, to keep fighting wars, because that's the best way he can achieve political survival. So I think it's those two factors together that account for what Israel is doing.
I wanted to get your reaction to some of the allegations of Joe Kent, who just resigned from the Trump administration over the Iran war. And in his telling, effectively, Israel came in and tricked, effectively, Trump into pursuing this path. He told Tucker Carlson yesterday, in clips, we're going to do a more fulsome review of this interview later in the show, but he told Tucker Carlson effectively they would bring in what appeared to be faulty intelligence to try to manipulate the president and his advisors, and that is ultimately the reason why Trump launched this war. What do you make of those allegations, and how does that match with the reporting and the thinking you've done about the way that Israel operates in the U.S.?
I have no doubt that Joe Kent is correct, that it was Israel and the Israel lobby that led us into this war. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said as much immediately after the war started. They made it clear that it wasn't the United States that took the initiative in starting this war. It was Israel that took the initiative, and Israel, in effect, dragged us in. Furthermore, you want to remember that Lindsey Graham has admitted that he went to Israel and he coached Prime Minister Netanyahu on how to convince President Trump to go to war against Iran. You just want to think about that. Here's a U.S. senator saying that he was coaching Prime Minister Netanyahu on how to get President Trump to go to war against Iran. In other words, President Trump needed coaching because his basic inclination was not to go to war against Iran. And then if you look at what was happening inside the United States, all you have to do is look at the two principal individuals who were advising Trump on whether or not he should go to war. They were Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who are passionate Zionists. In fact, Jonathan Powell, who is Britain's national security advisor, this is Britain's national security advisor. He was present at the negotiations that were taking place between Iran and the United States right before the war. And he describes Kushner and Witkoff as Israeli assets. Just think about that. The two principal advisors to President Trump. And remember, President Trump said that he was going to take his cue from those two individuals as to whether or not he should go to war against Iran, were seen by the British National Security Advisor as Israeli assets. Truly remarkable. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I could point to all sorts of other evidence that it was Israel and it was the lobby that pushed President Trump into this war.
And why do you think they succeeded with this president, with other presidents? Obviously, I mean, Netanyahu talks about it. He was wanted this war for 40 years as fulfillment of his greatest fantasy. Trump is not the first U.S. president to get pressured towards a war in Iran. What was it about him or his administration or the tactics that they used that allowed them to succeed here where they had failed in the past?
Well, first of all, there's the possibility that they have information about President Trump's past behavior that they're using to blackmail him. We have no hard evidence of that. I want to make it clear. But just watching this unfold, it does seem like that might be the case because President Trump is so beholden to the Israelis. It's really quite amazing. But I think the two other arguments that you can put on the table are, number one, that the Israelis actually convinced him that Iran was a paper tiger and that it could be easily brought to its knees. You want to remember that before the war started, when President Trump had moved the Armada into the Middle East, Steve Witkoff said that President Trump was surprised that the mere presence of the Armada and the threat that that Armada might be used against Iran didn't bring the Iranians to surrender. He thought that the mere threat of force would coerce the Iranians into surrendering. That tells you he thought that this regime was very weak. He thought it would fail quickly. And this, by the way, is why President Trump didn't accept the arguments that this would be a long war and that the Iranians were likely to shut the Strait of Hormuz. He has said that he was told that the Iranians were likely to shut the Strait of Hormuz, but he just didn't believe it because he thought we would win a quick and easy and decisive victory. So I think President Trump was primed, mainly through the Israelis, to think that this was going to be an easy victory. Then the other thing is, I think the Venezuela precedent gave him the impression that he could float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, that what he did in Venezuela, he could do in Iran. I don't think he fully realized, despite the fact that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was telling him that this was going to be an extremely difficult operation, and we really didn't have a good military option. President Trump just disregarded that. He thought that the naysayers said this before Venezuela, but I went out and proved that, we can do magical things in Venezuela, and I'll just do magical things again against Iran. And I think when you put Venezuela together with the stories he was being told about how weak and how vulnerable the Iranian regime was, I think it was easy for him to pull the trigger.
Last question for you, sir, about the Straits of Hormuz. It appears that some sort of ground operation is, I wouldn't say it seems potential with the deployment of all these troops. It would make sense in terms of the escalation ladder. I believe you've compared it before, potential to Gallipoli. What would that look like? What would that draw us into? Any sort of ground control operation on the Straits of Hormuz or on Karg Island?
Well, Karg Island is different than the Strait because you have to get through the Strait to get to Karg Island, unless you want to launch an attack from Saudi Arabia across the Persian Gulf onto the beaches of Karg Island, which I don't think we want to do. I think it's almost impossible to get through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, it's very clear that you can't use naval force alone to get through. The U.S. Navy won't even go near the Strait, and all the precedents in this regard say stay away. Ground forces, it would require a major operation. And even if you brought ground forces in and you controlled the terrain around the strait, the fact is it would still be exceedingly difficult for the Navy and for tankers and other kinds of ships, cargo ships, to get through the strait, in large part because there would still be mines at the bottom of the strait, lots of mines, which are easy for the Iranians to lay. And furthermore, the Iranians have all sorts of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones, both sea-based and air-based, that they can use to attack any ships that come near the strait. So I'm not sure that even if you wanted to commit large-scale ground forces to try and surround the strait, that would solve the problem. And most importantly here, once you commit large-scale ground forces, you're in a quagmire. Yeah. I mean, this would be disastrous. Trump clearly understands that putting ground forces anywhere inside of Iran, whether it's Karg Island, whether it's around the strait, whether you're talking about putting ground forces inside of Iran to try and capture that enriched uranium that they have, is a prescription for big trouble.